My name is Elizabeth Davis. I'm a musician and composer and audio engineer. My work sort of falls between two categories, what you could broadly call music and something that historically has been called radio art or sound collage or even sound poetry. I work a lot with electronics and also acoustic instruments, but also with language and narrative. I have a background in making radio plays and radio features, but also really music-y music, like albums and performing concerts and playing instruments. I've done projects where I made my own sort of acousmoniums with a lot of Bluetooth loudspeakers. I sort of like this idea of the loudspeaker orchestra and that history of spatial audio, I guess. Yeah, it's not something that I spend a ton of time really thinking about beyond just how will it change how the audience receives the music or perceives the music. So the project I've been working on at the Spatial Sound Studio started with these recordings I made in Tromsø earlier in the summer of these birds called kittiwakes. I'd never heard of them before, and as soon as I got off the bus from the airport there, I just heard this crazy sound. The birds, they sound to me sort of like stepping on cats. Not that I know from experience what that sounds like, but that's what it sounded like to me, or sort of babies crying, just not like any other birds I'd heard before, and couldn't stop thinking about these sounds that they'd been making. And at the same time, over the last year, I've been working with these bird call whistles that I've been collecting because I have this background in making radio plays and radiophonic art. I've always been a little obsessed with sound effect instruments and sort of accumulating them. And yeah, lately it's become all about bird calls. And I've found that I have this duck call whistle, and when you overblow it, it sounds really horrifying and nothing like a duck. And I was always thinking it sounds completely unnatural. But then when I heard the kittiwakes, it was a really similar sound. I decided not to use or to really fully rely on field recordings for this piece for two reasons. The first one is practical, which is that I was only there for a few days and I didn't have any of my recording equipment with me. I had to borrow some from a friend who was very generous, but still I didn't have time to spend days or weeks sitting there and making really high quality recordings of the birds. Also, that's just not really my practice. I don't do these sort of documentary style field recordings. I like listening to that stuff and I learn a lot from it, but that's not what I do. And it's a lot more rewarding to me to, sort of take reality or my like observed reality as a starting off point for imagining a new sound, not the sounds that are already there. I think this work really lends itself well to being made in a spatial sound context. Even though I just said how this isn't really a field recording project, and the thing I do love about field recordings, and that I noticed from listening back to the recordings I made of the birds, is you get this really sort of surreal sense of space, I find, when listening back to recordings, whether they were made sort of with stereo or like XY or binaural or whatever. Like, I find always listening back to multi-channel works or sort of documentation of a space totally surreal. I'm also sort of really influenced, I guess, by like the way Eliane Rodriguez spoken about spatial audio or multi-channel audio and how she works with it, where she sort of has this resistance to creating super spatialized or like locatable sounds within a spatial playback, but more just trying to make the sound as diffuse as possible. And yeah, I like that because I'm not making a documentary and I'm not trying to create something realistic. I just trying to fill a room with sound. One of the most exciting moments for me listening on this system this week has been early on. I do a lot of field recordings just on my phone. I'm quite happy with it, even though someone has told me if you use different apps, somehow they change the settings it records, and I just use the default one. It has this high cut at like 18K, but if you ignore that, it's fine. Anyways, so I was listening back to one of these recordings I'd made on my phone on the system here and was really surprised by how full it sounded and how much detail there was, especially once I started processing it a little bit. There's also such a difference between listening to recorded sound in space versus listening to either your environment or instruments, things that are really coming from like point sources, for lack of a better word. I don't know. I'm not very good at locating the source of sounds, personally. I guess that's why I like this Eliane Rodriguez way of diffusing sound. And I know it's like a very important part of cognitive function to be able to use sound to orient yourself in space. But I think, because that doesn't work for me all the time super well, I have learned to sort of just enjoy hearing things and not necessarily look for meaning or information in them all the time.